Okay, welcome everyone to the Geoeconomics Summit 2026. And thank you for attending this very important initial session on Asia and global order. I'm Cheol Park, Special Advisor at the International House of Japan, and also am a Professor Emeritus at Seoul National University. I'm very pleased and honored to moderate this session. But before we begin this session, I wanted to have some initial context making remarks. The international order, as we have known, is undergoing rapid and deep change. We may say that this is a great transformation. Once, and Karl Polanyi wrote a book called The Great Transformation, but we are undergoing the similar kind of a greater transformation at this moment. Global peace is under serious challenge. In the post-Cold War period, we welcomed the global peace, and we believe that it was induced by the global leader, hegemonic country. We have a theory called the hegemonic stability theory. But what we are experiencing now is a hegemonic instability. The instability and unpredictability are ironically caused by a hegemonic country. And during the post-Cold War period, prosperity was believed to be guaranteed by increasing and deepening interdependence among nations, what we call globalization. However, we are witnessing the other kind of phenomena that is, as the Professor Suzuki mentioned, the weaponization of interdependence. So economic security became the trend of the days. And I would say that the globalization is broken. So we are living in the era of broken globalization. The rules-based international order, where international organizations and the international laws are respected, is also retreating very rapidly. What we are experiencing is a rules-breaking international order. So many countries do not regard international law that much seriously. Even they are talking about, they neglected, bypassed, or even when they're working, it's malfunctioning. So the instability, uncertainty, unpredictability became the rules of the game, not exception. Especially when you look at the kind of a current international situation, especially after the Iran war, what we are witnessing is a kind of disrupted supply chains of everything, including energy. And then now Asian countries became the kind of the biggest and primary big victim of the energy crisis. So how to adapt it to the situation under this energy crisis and supply chain disruption is critically important, and that we have a daily experience of all disrupted the supply chains and energy crisis. So today, with this context in mind, we are going to address a few questions to how to navigate through this very turbulent period of energy crisis and disrupted supply chain. It is our great honor and pleasure to have all distinguished, renowned panelists from all different places. On my left, we have Mr. Saleh Al-Mana, Assistant Undersecretary for Commercial Affairs at the Ministry of Commerce and Industry from Qatar. And we have the Nobuo Tanaka, a globally known expert on energy. And he's a CEO of the Tanaka Global Inc. As you know, he is Executive Director Emeritus of the International Energy Agency, Mr. Energy. And we have Zain Nakano, who is a global specialist in energy security at the CSIS in the United States. I already gave some the common questions to the panelists, but actually you have the freedom to say whatever the topic you have in mind about the energy security and the supply chain disruption. So I will give about 7 minutes each to give a kind of initial setting for the panel. And after your remarks, I will give individual questions to each. And then after all that round, I'm going to open the floor for Q&A sessions to everybody. Can you start from, this is East Asia, so we follow the seniority rule first. So Nobuo Tanaka first, please.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm the oldest one in the panel, so I'm delighted to speak first. As a former executive director of the International Energy Agency, I'm getting very popular because of the big strategic stockpile release happening here and there. Certainly, Fatih Birol, the current executive director, said this crisis in the Middle East is the largest in the size of the disruption. Even it's more than the two biggest disruption in the history. First, oil shock in the 1973, and the second Iranian crisis in the 79 together. And they did a huge release, but certainly the price is still high, and disruption may continue. Even the transportation of the oil may come back. The Strait of Hormuz could be open, but disruption will continue because of certain, facilities in the Middle East be attacked and bombed in both ways. So I think the situation will, very unpredictable situation, and high prices will continue. So I have been saying that the biggest change in the geopolitics of energy can be described as a battle between two dominant powers. The first dominant power is so-called Petro-States, led by the United States, drill baby drill policy by the President Trump, and Russia, and Saudi Arabia. So these countries are, in a way, communicating each other and using the oil or gas as a weapon, while the other dominant power is led by China. I call them Electro-States. And they are using the electrification as much as possible by electric vehicle batteries, solar panel, windmills, nuclear powered electrolyzer. So by doing so, China is reducing the dependency of its oil and gas from either Russia, Middle East, and the United States. Yes, China contributes by doing so to reduce carbon emission reduction. But they are doing for the sake of national security. It is clear from the beginning. And the European Union is doing basically the same thing, to reduce dependency on the Russian fossil fuels. So this coalition of Petro-States against Electro-States, where Ambassador Park, Japan and Korea should join. We don't have any resources of gas and oil, so we have to go to the Electro-States. But we cannot forget about the very important defense agreement with United States. So we have to go both ways. But this electrification will be accelerated by the Iranian crisis. That is what the IEA is saying. So we cannot waste time. We have to work very fast. First, with United States, probably the nuclear power generation is very important. I'm always arguing US, Japan, and Korea should work with sustainable nuclear technology with US, which has been developed by the United States as integral fast reactor. I don't get into too much details. This is more easy to be a safety side, security side, as well as easy to manage the high-level radioactive waste, and also proliferation resistant. So I call this technology sustainable nuclear. And Japan, Korea needs it because of the reducing the waste and for the sake of more safety use of the nuclear power. So we have to work with these three countries should develop the nuclear model for the future. Another coalition with China, I think Japan and Korea should develop together this hydrogen supply chain. For the Electro-States, petroleum stockpile doesn't make sense. But how can we make storage of electricity? That is hydrogen. MCH, ammonia, these stuff provide the security for the electro-states in the future. So I think there are many things. Electric vehicle could be a most important element in the future. Japan successfully, after the first or second oil shock, to sell the very efficient automobiles in the world. We created huge trade issues with US and Europe. But next will happen is Chinese electric vehicles will be everywhere. How can Japan, Korea, we are the very good producer of automobiles, how can we cooperate together to build and very efficient auto sector in the future? I think we have to do a lot domestically to prepare for the electro-states of Japan and Korea. And finally, the last point I want to make, the electro-state should make a kind of rule-based arrangement or framework for the future. I think CPTPP, Comprehensive Progressive Pacific, Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, could be the one. Already, United Kingdom is a member. Unfortunately, US moved out. But UK is member. China, Taiwan are asking the membership. Korea seems to join soon. United Arab Emirates wants to be a member. So this group can be a rule-making place for green technologies and green products for the electro-state in the future. CBAM, carbon border adjustment measures of Europe should be adjusted during the framework negotiation as such. And this CPTPP is a legacy of the late Shinzo Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan, and new Prime Minister Takaichi-san, she is very happy to follow the legacy of the Abe. This is probably the most important Japan-Korea initiative of building the framework or rules for the electro-states in the future. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. I like the concept of categorizing countries to the Petro-State and the Electro-State, which is very easy to understand. And then I think global posture will be different depending on that diagram. So I have a few questions later, but why don't you, how many hours did it takes to come to Tokyo?
Well, usually I think it's around a 10-hour flight, but it was a little bit more than that due to the reroute that we had to take. So.
All right. So I'll give the floor to Mr. Saleh Almana next. So for about 7 minutes.
Sure. Thank you very much, Ambassador Park, and I'd like to thank the Institute of Geoeconomics for organizing this event. Also to welcome my fellow panelists here today and all of the members of the audience. Obviously, I think, Ambassador Park, you've highlighted it very well in the sense that over the past couple of decades, we had a system which was not perfect, but was functioning in a manner that created somewhat of a rules-based system that provided the necessary transparency and the necessary predictability for businesses and countries to conduct trade in a manner that is safe and efficient. And over the past couple of years, we've seen an increased challenge to the global economy that led to somewhat of a shift in how trade is conducted. Now, the basis of the fact that we had a sort of process that could take place in the sense of how we conduct commerce and how we do business has been affected, does have sort of like a ripple effect to the future. And this has led to obviously a lot of outcomes, whether it's inflation or pressure on pricing, but has also had adverse effect on other industries. For example, today, when it comes to shipping, the price of insurance has surged dramatically. And we'll continue to see other negative effects unless we solve this issue. Now, in that sense, obviously, when we talk about the Strait of Hormuz, it's certainly a critical international waterway. It's important that countries preserve it and preserve the international rule of law in the sense that the United Nations Law of Seas for both safe passage and safe transit. And this is particularly true for commercial vessels. Commercial companies and logistics providers should be able to feel safe when they conduct their business in the region and elsewhere, actually. And obviously, if this whole system gets disrupted, and since it's a very intricate system, we will have a negative sort of side effect in the future. Now, there could be discussions on the fact that there could be like some sort of a alternative or some sort of controls to safeguard against that. But I think we already do have a system that we could fix and we could go back to, which is the international rules-based system, going back to whether it's the World Trade Organization or the United Nations. And maybe I'll just conclude on one simple point, which is the fact that for the past couple of decades, we have seen positive economic growth in the long term. And more importantly, we also saw that there was a positive contribution of developing countries in global trade over the past couple of decades. And maybe the most important element to this is the fact that it is an inclusive process that could bring all countries together. And therefore, it's important that any situation we face, it should be resolved through dialogue, through mediation, and through a negotiated outcome that would serve the interests of all parties pertaining that. Thank you.
Thank you. You emphasized the importance of a free international waterway, which is blocked now in the Middle East. And then also you touch upon the developing countries is very important because many are neglected. Many are talking about only great power rivalry, and forget the developing countries or the underdeveloped countries. That's a kind of very important point we can discuss later. Jane, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the Institute of Geoeconomics for having me, and congratulations on the summit. So I wanted to share my thought with you about the way I look at how the energy is not just a domain where we see geopolitical competition playing out, but also it's a factor that shapes the global order. So even before, obviously the current sort of Hormuz energy crisis is a big factor, but we have been seeing energy as a domain where we see all these geopolitical competition playing out. Of course, Russia has been leveraging its oil gas supply to really test the will of the Western countries over the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But also the EU and the United States have been using sanctions and price caps to really targeting Russian energy supplies. And so that's a very still ongoing example. We've also seen the global supply chains for things like critical minerals and clean energy technologies where China and the West have been competing. I think that's also where the United States now has more of a bipartisan consensus that this is something that we really need to do more to be able to stay competitive. But also among the G7 countries, we've seen the 5-point energy security, the critical mineral security plan under the Japan's leadership. Also under Canada's leadership, we've seen action plan. Also, that's also where I think the global South has been seeing sort of a geopolitical competition play out as they look to both the West and China for ways to improve energy access, whether through greater access to clean tech components, whether it's the EV batteries or EV themselves or solar panels, versus things like maybe geothermal and eventually small modular nuclear, likely. And also, I think we're seeing right at the moment OPEC plus politics. I think there's also the internal OPEC plus competition, but then also OPEC plus versus the United States as one of the top producers of oil and gas. Now, so how does the world order look like in the future, and how does energy shape them? I have no answer to either of the questions, but there are a couple of things that I think of as a signpost, as I try to ascertain how the future may look like. And especially in light of the current energy crisis, I think one, the future of the oil and gas security governance is a major area to watch. Among the, of course, Middle Eastern supplier side, the initial concern that we had was about the flow through the Strait of Hormuz. But now the concern is also about the production level, because all these military actions have damaged oil gas drilling infrastructure, and also export terminals, et cetera. So it's no longer just about sort of a commercial, the sea lane issue. It's also all these infrastructure and investments. So what does it mean, right? And then also, I think the departure of the UAE from the OPEC plus, is this really the start of this price war? For OECD economies such as Japan and Korea and et cetera, I think in March, the IEA announced roughly 400 billion barrels worth of a coordinated stock release. But at the end of April, already about 790 billion barrels, worth of, energy or oil has been disrupted. So the scale is already a bit off, right? So I think that gives us a question as to how the future of OECD's oil gas management may have to look like. Do we need to modernize it? If so, how and how would it look like? Quickly, the second and third, and then also, before I forget, I think also this maritime energy trade with the Strait of Hormuz basically, under shutdown, really, what are some of the lessons, let's say for the Strait of Malacca? Back in the 1984, 88, when there was the Iran-Iraq war that affected some of the vessels and some of the passage through the strait, it has happened, but the flow was never affected the way it is being affected right at the moment. So again, this gives us a sort of a renewed context to think about these issues. The second signpost is about the fiscal stamina for the Middle Eastern supplier countries. The time and the money that will be required to really restore will be quite significant. There are all these estimates that are out there, but that will definitely test the stamina of major key stakeholders, but also for the importing countries as well. All these governments have the measures and tools to really mitigate supply shocks. And so going forward, there will be some fiscal priorities that will be reshuffled, as many of the countries will come out of this war with probably bit under reduced stamina. Lastly, and I think we can probably get to this more during the subsequent rounds, but the future of U.S.-China competition. I appreciated Tanaka-san's comment about the Petro-State and Electro-State, but generally speaking, putting aside how the war started and what have you, but as far as the energy effects go, I think the United States has shown its role as energy security booster. The U.S. crude export has increased significantly, about 30% higher than about a year ago, around this time. And much of that has been now going to Asia, including our key allies in Asia Pacific, such as Japan and Korea. About, 65% higher at the moment. Crude, the feedstocks and products like naphtha, that's now seeing a lot of volume coming to Asia. LNG as well. it has seen 175% increase between February and March of this year. But I think China has also shown a lot of strength. To me, it's not so much about renewables. Certainly, electrification helps by reducing the requirement for oil-based transportation fuels. But I think it's also the large stock, domestic oil and gas production, having also maritime and also land-based import and trading relationships, etc. But I think there are still a lot of questions that still need to be answered to see whether, which of the two countries have better stamina coming out of the current crisis. Because as the war drags on, there are many other internal political economic issues that need to really be tested. So let me stop there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for all the wonderful remarks. I will raise a few individual questions to each panelist. First to Mr. Tanaka. In the middle of your presentation, you said a kind of China as a the Electro-State, relying on renewable energy and this clean energy, has some national security aspect, which is a very interesting the observation in a sense that in the past, geopolitics and geoeconomics, they were all separate area. Geoeconomics is the economist area. Geopolitics is a political scientist, but they're all mixed. And then that has lots of strategic implication for all. That's why it's very hard to understand at this moment what's going on. So when you talk about the kind of the China has some national security concerns and the strategic aim when they rely on these specific energy sources. What do you mean by that? So I wanted to hear your elaborated explanation about what is the kind of a national security implication of that strategy and how it affects U.S.-China rivalry in that context. And the second question is also, you mentioned the importance of the nuclear power generation. So in addition to oil and gas and then clean energy, the renewable energy, there's nuclear is another alternative that many people are talking about. But the country like in Japan and in Korea, there is a kind of some, not phobia, but it's a kind of some negative responses about the nuclear use. So can nuclear power generation be a very effective alternative to a fossil fuel energy? So as you have a long experience of dealing with all different kinds of energy in the world, I think I wanted to hear your opinion about that. And I will give you the questions first so that you can respond. And Mr. Saleh Almana, the Qatar have lots of cooperative ties with Asian countries. Japan is not the only country that you export the energy resources. But as you know, at this moment, the Asian countries are one of the most vulnerable countries in the world because countries like Japan and Korea do not produce oil and natural gas. So we have to rely on the energy resource from the Middle East. So from the Qatari perspective, how can you deepen and widen the cooperation between Qatar and Asian countries in terms of energy supply, and also to secure supply chain related to the energy? That's the first question. And the second, as you're in charge of commerce and industry, also in investment, at this juncture, I like the kind of the Chinese character of crisis, wiki. That is a crisis and opportunity at the same time. So it's a crisis, and it's just a kind of a dangerous moment. In a sense, it's an opportunity, especially for the business chances sometimes, because there is a crisis. So as you have dealt with all this industry and commerce and investment for a long time. So where to invest at this moment? So this is the area you have to avoid at this moment. But this is the kind of very potential area to grow for some foreseeable future. So as a person in charge of your Ministry of Commerce and Industry, this area is a kind of a potential area to invest more, not just for one single country, for a region or global setting. That's the kind of the second question I wanted to hear from you. And to Jane, the end of your remark, you talk about the U.S.-China competition. You have analyzed the U.S.-China competition from an energy point of view for a long time. And yesterday, I happened to read one article at Foreign Affairs, where the author argues that there are always winners and losers in a crisis moment, especially in times of this the energy shocks. His basic argument was that China investing more on renewables may emerge as a winner, while Washington can be an ultimate loser. So it's a kind of his conception is the Electro-State will win, Petro-State will go down. Do you agree? So that's I wanted to hear your view about how you see the situation, because many countries rely on different sources of energy development. So and then because whether we can secure the sustainable energy sources is a great strategic concern for every country. So I wanted to hear your view on that. And as this is a kind of a geoeconomics summit, so the second question is, in order to reduce vulnerability, many people are talking about diversifying import lines and diversifying energy sources, so diversifying your strategic partners. So they're all talking about diversifying because relying on a single country or a certain area is too risky. So diversification is necessary. Yeah, but that's very easy to say, but very hard to implement in reality. So from your perspective, dealing with the energy issue for such a long time, so what is the kind of very optimal combination of the diversifying the energy sources to cope with the energy crisis like this moment? So, Mr. Tanaka first.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador Park. Your question about China as well as the nuclear power. Yeah, this is a very important element when we discuss about Electro-States. China has long been thinking about electrification as a very strategic sense. And China always say that they contribute by the electrification to the decarbonization and climate change mitigation. So that's a beautiful side of the story. But actually, when I talked to, it's more than 10 years ago, I think I talked to the former general of the People's Liberation Army. And he clearly said to me that, Mr. Tanaka, China is doing renewables like solar, wind, etc. But it's not for the climate change mitigation. This is for national security. So if the top general of the People's Liberation Army is thinking like that way, their strategy is clear. It is national security arrangement and reducing dependency of fossil fuels from Middle East, from Russia, and from the United States. So it's very successful. In a way, too successful because they invested heavily to the electrification-related industries, technologies, materials. So they made a huge success of kind of controlling the critical mineral supply chains. And in fact, US-China trade wars, somewhat the leverage of China is critical mineral control. And overcapacity of the all other parts of their production, solar cells, wind turbines, electric vehicles, batteries. So the price of these products are so cheap, and huge competitiveness they achieved in the trade with every country. Just as Japan did it after the first and second oil shock, our very fuel-efficient automobiles, very competitive electronics created a huge trade war with US and Europe. So same thing is happening. So I think in a way that, thanks to Mr. Trump's, the war with Iran, I think the third oil shock favors to solve this overcapacity issue, because now the electric vehicles sales are rising and very fast in many places, in Asia particularly. Asia do not have oil strategic stockpile so much, so they have to move to the electrification of the transportation sector. Because when Japan was hit by 1973 by the first oil shock, we have only 50 days of stockpile, and 70% of electricity comes from petroleum thermal power. So it was a shock to the oil, but to the electricity also. We did a lot to conservation of electricity, changing the, turn off the lightings, neon signs, reducing the temperature or up in the cooling. So this kind of thing happens, and eventually we solve the problem by developing liquefied natural gas, coal, nuclear power. So I think very interesting moment that China is did the very right thing, and it was proven by this war. And I think China is in a very good move. I think US-China will discuss together 5 T's. First, trade. Second, technology. The third, Tehran. And fourth, Taiwan. And final T is Takaichi. So we have to prepare for what China and US is going to talk about. And I think Japan should take initiative with Korea to make more electrification or Electro-States initiative, like connecting power grid lines between Korea and Japan first, and then eventually with China. That kind of initiative of Electro-States and managing together a very important strategic resources like decarbonized electricity, we have to do more. I mean, rather than just saying, okay, we are open for any kind of initiative from China, we are happy to talk with you. No, we have to initiate more proactively toward China. That is the only way to defend ourselves. The nuclear, well, I'm sorry to get a little long, but I told about integral fast reactor of United States. It is, I think this is the technology which is sustainable nuclear, because it minimizes the risk of accident and the impact of the accident, because it's a small scale. So the second is radioactive waste management. It can reduce the toxicity very rapidly within just 300 years. Regular technology, we needed 300,000 years. So, and it can apply to the meltdown debris or corium of Fukushima. Fukushima's corium cannot be transported out of the prefecture. It should be treated there. And this technology is really necessary. And Korea needs this technology to reduce waste together. But unfortunately, the United States didn't allow you to do only for Japan, but Japan, Korea, and US should develop this sustainable nuclear technology together. And eventually, if Iran is interested in doing the same thing, let's go and together make this technology available for Iran. Iran needs peaceful use technology like this. And because this technology is difficult to use for the, military sense or weaponization. So I think this kind of new concept of nuclear can help to get the public acceptance. Because if we say that, okay, now very severe safety standards of Japan you don't have to worry about accident. No, this cannot be convincing for the Japanese public. We need a new narrative and innovative idea to convince Japanese public to accept the nuclear system or nuclear power as a part of electro-state solution. So we have to do a lot. And I don't go into much details, but the role of women is very important. So I created in Canon Institute only group of women recommending the certain technologies of nuclear. And this is the case. And this technology is the one, the US one. But I think there's a good chance Japan, US, and Korea develop this as a sustainable nuclear power for the future.
Thank you. I'm thankful, especially to the proposal of making the nuclear energy sustainable by setting up something. The Korea, as you know, nuclear waste, the disposal site is fully packed already. So and we don't have nuclear full cycle. So without reprocessing the material used, we are in danger. So we have to reuse all those nuclear waste for the country, for the region, and for the globe. A wonderful suggestion. Mr. Almana.
Perfect. Thank you so much, and thank you for those questions. I'll start with the first one, obviously, between the relationship between the state of Qatar and our strategic partners in Asia, especially when it comes to economic investment and trade relations. In fact, for the state of Qatar, 8 out of the top 10 trading partners are from Asia. So it does signify a large portion of our trade. Annually, we trade about $80 billion only in merchandise trade, and it's also expected to continue to grow. Out of that, obviously, the majority of it is within energy, but we are trading in other goods as well. And this includes certain petrochemicals and downstream products, which is also reflective of why we need to resolve the situation facing the Middle East right now. Because it's not only in energy, it's also in, for example, certain fertilizers, such as urea, which is a large portion of it is coming out of the state of Qatar, but also the entire Gulf. Another critical industrial good is also ammonia, which is also largely produced within the Gulf and is exiting the Strait of Hormuz. So obviously, we do need to resolve this situation, not only for the energy, but for also other goods that will continue to put pressure on prices and inflation. Now, on the question concerning how we can maintain or grow this economic and trading relationship, actually, we're already working on this issue because the state of Qatar, part of the Gulf Cooperation Council, is already engaging very actively with its Asian partners, whether it's on issues concerning, for example, free trade agreements. We are focused on our partners, especially in Asia. We managed actually to conclude an FTA with Korea. We have also concluded an FTA with Pakistan, actively negotiating with Japan, but also looking at other partners in the whole Asian continent. And obviously, when it comes to energy, we are expecting that demand will continue to increase, as well as supply from the state of Qatar, but the entire region. And it's also important to note when we talk about diversification. Sure, diversification is certainly very important, and we need to focus on it and how to preserve energy security, food security, but also economic security in general. But for energy specifically, around 50% of oil reserves are in the Arab states. So regardless of the diversification process that does take place, resolving the situation in the Middle East is also of utmost importance. I also want to talk about another issue that did face some challenges, which is actually air travel. Obviously, due to the strategic geographic positioning of the region, air travel was disrupted in a very negative manner. And a lot of the transit that does take place for airliners that are taking not only passengers but also cargo. For example, for us in the state of Qatar, the Qatar Airways has invested significantly in air cargo and is one of the largest air cargo fleets. So having it completely halted or stopped poses a huge risk towards that east to west trade, not only in shipping but also on air. Pivoting, I guess, towards the second question concerning investments. Obviously, I don't prefer to give counsel on where to invest, because if you do give a bad counsel, I don't want to get blamed for that. But in terms of investments, obviously, it's my job to say you should invest in Qatar. And I would also make that argument and continue to make that argument because there are many opportunities in Qatar, but also the entire region. And this includes, obviously, a rising population, but also a lot of demand that is also coming out of the region, as there's a lot of investments in infrastructure, investments in certain other industries like sports, like innovation. Like annually in the state of Qatar, we host the regional web summit. So a lot of innovators do come to the state of Qatar and to look at investment opportunities, but also look at innovative solutions to provide to the market. So yeah, I would definitely say that innovation in our region has a lot of potential, and I'd certainly look very positively towards that. In fact, a lot of Asian companies are also looking positively to the region and have expanded operations in the state of Qatar, mainly, but also broadly in the entire region. And this is due to a lot of regulatory reforms that have taken place in the past. And this also includes, for example, allowance of 100% foreign ownership of investments, but also updating and upscaling regulations so that's much more accommodating for investors. So yes, while there is a situation now, I still think that there's a very bright future ahead of us. Thank you.
Mr. Almana, can I ask a more specific question? I'm an investment banker. I have $1 billion to invest in Qatar.
Yeah.
Where to invest?
Maybe after the session we can have a discussion. But no, there are a lot of opportunities, and specifically, I would probably say that we have placed certain strategies in place, and this includes certain target sectors, whether it's in manufacturing, innovation, but also, and very relative to what's going on right now, food security, which does go back to the whole premise of diversification, because that also applies there. And we have diversified through logistical investments in logistical services, but also critical infrastructure. So there is certainly opportunity, I guess, in these fields.
Thank you. Thank you for specific answers. Jane?
Thank you so much for the two questions, Mr. Ambassador. So who are the winners and losers from the Korean War and the Hormuz energy crisis? So I think, in my view, China has been doing quite well, as I mentioned during my sort of prepared remark. But I think it's also important to see that, within China, there is massive overcapacity. And if the economy really suffers from the Korean War, and if the demand destruction, whether it's for crude oil or other commodities, become more widespread, I think China would definitely have to worry about the degree to which that its overcapacity could be resolved by being able to export some of these commodities. There was an interesting article in FT about BYD about a week ago that it's making, its first quarter profit was about half the level year over year compared to the first quarter of 2025 because of the so-called involution issue, cutthroat competition. And so for that reason, many of these highly competitive Chinese companies really have to consider going abroad more than ever before. So it's not just sort of exporting the products, but also opening up factories in whether in Europe like Hungary or in Brazil, in Indonesia. But so I mean that has been that's starting to happen, but then also there might be greater pushback from some of these host governments if they do not see their economies to become part of the supply chains. They don't necessarily just want to become buyers. They want to be able to benefit from these supply chains by being able to perhaps manufacture some parts of batteries for the EVs that the Chinese companies may want to build and sell in these regions. So I think, to some extent, exactly, whether China will be the definite winner is still, I think, up to a bit of a debate. Also, the United States has been much more focused on fossil fuels plus nuclear. And I think that, analysis is correct. But also, there has been greater attention to the fact that things like energy storage technologies, batteries, are quite important, not just for energy or energy transition or decarbonization, but it's all for the resilience of the grid, the power grid system, also for some defense applications. So even within the United States, there's a renewed look at how to have more robust domestic manufacturing base for these clean tech, but that also has energy security attributes such as batteries. So I think it's the race isn't completely over yet. And I should also note that it also depends how some of China's key economic partners may come out of this war. For example, what happens to Iran? Iran has been one of the more important suppliers of crude oil, although China's supply portfolio is quite diversified. What may happen to Russia? That's a huge question. Now with all these sanction reliefs on the way, the United States Treasury Department has been extending the waivers so that many countries can access energy supply to really avert some major crisis and panic throughout the economies. But how Russia may come out of the current crisis is a big question, as already the Chinese leadership has said that it's in their national security interest to make sure that Russia does not lose the war in Ukraine. It serves as a good distraction to the United States and EU. So there's that. As far as the perfect diversification profile, I actually do think that China has one of the most resilient diversified portfolios. As I mentioned, they have land-based, maritime-based energy relationships. They also have domestic supply. Their power system, in my view, is a little too still coal-heavy. Installed renewable capacity is quite impressive, but the actual utilization needs to improve more. But China is also investing in quite a bit of high voltage transmission lines. To some extent, I think the diversification is expensive, right? So I think there's a bit of an inverse relations. But as for many of these economies, including Japan, Korea, of course the US and China, that desire to stay competitive as sort of advanced manufacturing countries, especially becoming competitive in this age of AI. How you meet the electricity demand is extremely important. And as much as sometimes we get too focused on affordability and reliability, I actually do think that carbon intensity cannot be ignored just because, especially in countries like China, the qualitative element of economic development is tied to the domestic stability. So, and even in the US, and a lot of hyperscalers do have shareholder commitments to try to meet their energy needs as, in a sustainable manner as possible. But I think diversification, and then I'm sorry, really quickly, again, I guess, I do think that for countries that already have industrial capacity, such as Japan and Korea, nuclear does make sense. Just the capacity factor is so much higher. The footprint is so much smaller for the amount of the electricity that it could supply. So, but it doesn't have to come at the expense of renewables development. But I do hope that it will come at the expense of coal fire generation. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We enjoyed the session. I just remind the kind of Tanaka Nobuo's remark in the beginning. We have a Petro-State and then Electro-State, but actually almost all the countries have a hybrid strategy. The fossil fuel and the nuclear power, renewable energy. So how to combine those energy to make it sustainable and survival is very important. So, but we have to keep in mind that we are doing this game in a global context. It's a kind of great power rivalry is there about energy secure and the supply. But at the same time, as Mr. Almana mentioned, we are forgetting the importance of developing countries and global south. Many are just neglected related to the issues of developing countries, and we have to keep that in mind. What is the impact of all these crises for developing countries and the underdeveloped countries? They are more troubled than us. So I think that's critically important. But as all of the panelists said, actually, how to secure? I don't think we can go back to the liberal international order we have enjoyed. But how to make the international order free and open is still important. So the free navigation on the waterway, as Mr. Almana mentioned, the free trade without naval blockade, right? The free communication without government intervention, those are all important still for the trade and commerce in the industry. So I think we have to keep on going. And I think we all talk about strategies in the age of this geoeconomics and economic security, but we have to have some universal principles and norms to be shared. If not, we should take a very proactive initiative to sustain it for the future and for all the people. All right, time clock, right? So please join me with a big round of applause for their wonderful presentations and responses. Thank you.